My mother kicked me out at 18 with nothing. Now she shows up after 10 years begging to live in my house. But I slammed the door and they never expected what I did next. I'm 30 years old. I work in tech, making more than my parents earned in their entire lives combined. And I live in a house I bought myself about 4 years ago. And I need to tell this story because a few months ago, my parents showed up at my door asking me to let them live with me after they literally kicked me out of the house when I turned 18. The irony is so brutal that sometimes I laugh to myself thinking about it. But it also makes my blood boil because the audacity of these people has no limits. Seriously. Let me start from the beginning, so you understand why, when I saw my father, David, standing at my doorstep with that defeated look on his face, the only thing I felt was a cold satisfaction and a deep desire to slam the door in his face. I grew up in a house where I was basically a nuisance, you know, like that old piece of furniture your parents don't want but don't bother to throw away either. My father worked in construction and always came home tired, in a bad mood, with this attitude that the world owed him something. My mother, Elizabeth, was a stay-at-home mom but obsessed with everything being spotless, like the kind of people who clean the house before the cleaning person arrives. You know what I mean? I was more work for her, another thing to clean up after, another mouth to feed. I don't remember a single moment, and when I say not one, I mean not one, when my parents made me feel loved or valued. There were no hugs, no conversations about how was your day, no genuine interest in me as a person. I was an obligation they fulfilled for 18 years and nothing more. When I turned 17, my father started making comments about how I was almost an adult and would soon have to fend for myself. And I thought it was the typical parent talk about responsibility. But no, the guy was literally counting down the days to get rid of me. 3 weeks after my 18th birthday, which by the way we celebrated with a normal dinner and zero fanfare because why bother making anything special? My parents sat me down at the kitchen table and told me, "You have 1 month to find somewhere to live and a job because you're an adult now and it's time for you to be independent." Just like that, out of nowhere. It wasn't a conversation. It was an announcement. My mother was there wiping down the counter while my father talked. They weren't even looking me in the eyes. I asked them if they were serious, and my father said, "Very serious. This is what's best for you. You need to learn to survive on your own." My mother just nodded and kept cleaning. You know what it feels like to have your own parents tell you that you're basically in the way? That they don't want to keep supporting you for even one more day after you reach legal age? I had just finished high school. I had zero savings because they never let me work during school. My mother said it would distract me from my studies. But I think it was just convenient for her to have me at home to help with household chores, and suddenly I had 30 days to get a job, a place to live, and basically build a life from nothing. That month was absolute chaos. I applied to every job I could find, anything that didn't require experience. And I finally got a position at a grocery store making minimum wage, like $8 an hour or something. I found a studio. And when I say studio, I mean a tiny room with a shared bathroom in a building that smelled like mold and marijuana 24/7. But it was the only thing I could afford with what I was making. The day I moved out, my parents didn't help me with anything. They didn't even give me a ride. I had to ask a classmate to lend me his truck. My mother gave me a box with some old sheets and chipped dishes, stuff they were going to throw away anyway. And that was it. My father didn't even come out of his room to say goodbye. The first few months were brutal. And I'm not exaggerating when I say there were days when I only ate ramen and whatever I could get from the grocery store with my employee discount. I worked 8-hour shifts, standing at the cash register, and then went to my studio to cry from exhaustion and rage because I couldn't believe this was my life at 18. I saw other kids my age in college living in dorms, with their parents paying for everything, only worrying about their studies and their parties. And here I was calculating if I could afford to buy laundry detergent or if I'd have to use the money to eat. But the thing is, and this sounds kind of cliche, but it's true, all that rage and resentment I felt transformed into an almost obsessive determination to prove they weren't going to destroy me. I enrolled in community college taking 2 classes per semester, the maximum I could handle working full-time, and I basically had no social life for years. While other kids my age were going out and having fun, I was studying in the library until it closed, or working extra shifts to be able to pay tuition. I got a second job cleaning offices at night because they paid a little more, and I could study during breaks when no one was around. At 21, I finished my associate's degree, and let me tell you that when I walked at that graduation and received my diploma, not a single member of my family was there. Zero. They didn't even know I had graduated because it had been like 2 years since I'd talked to them. Well, that's not entirely true. My Aunt Patricia had called me a couple of times to see how I was doing, but it was obvious my parents had asked her to check that I wasn't dead in a ditch or something, not because they genuinely cared. I'd tell her I was fine and cut the call short because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing anything about my life. I transferred to a state university, and somehow, I don't even know how, but I did it. I kept taking classes while working 2 jobs. I got promoted at the grocery store to supervisor, which gave me a small raise, and I left the cleaning job for one in 25, the university's IT department that paid better and gave me experience in what I actually wanted to do. It was 3 more years of basically not sleeping, of living with horrible roommates in cheap apartments, of eating the same thing every day because it was the most economical, but I graduated. At 24, I had my bachelor's degree in computer science and 0 student debt, because I worked like crazy to pay for everything out of pocket semester by semester. My first real job after graduating was at a medium-sized tech company. Nothing fancy, but they paid decent, like $55,000 a year, which for me at that time was an absolute fortune. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment that was mine alone. No roommates. And I cried the first day because I had my own clean space where nobody bothered me. I kept being super frugal with my money. I saved almost 40% of my salary because I had this kind of crazy goal of buying a house before I was 30. People at work went out to eat every day, and I brought my lunch in Tupperware. They went on vacations, and I worked those weeks to earn extra money. I basically sacrificed everything for this goal I had set for myself. At 26, after 2 promotions and a company change that brought my salary up to almost $90,000, I bought my house. A real house, with 2 bedrooms, a small yard, in a quiet neighborhood. The day I signed the papers and got the keys, I sat on the floor of the empty living room and thought about my parents. About how they told me I had to learn to survive on my own. And I felt so proud of myself but also so empty, because I didn't have anyone to celebrate with. I called a friend from work and we went to dinner somewhere simple. But it wasn't the same as having a family who was genuinely happy for you, you know? 2 years later, when I was 28, my Aunt Patricia called me. It had been months since the last time we'd heard from each other, and when I saw her name on the screen, I almost didn't answer because I knew that if she was reaching out after so long, it was for something. I answered, and she said, "I need to talk to you about your parents." And I was already ready to hang up, but something in her tone made me stay on the line. Turns out my father had made a horrible investment in a business with a friend. Like he put all their savings and their house as collateral for a loan, and obviously the business failed. They lost the house, the savings, everything. My aunt was telling me this as if I was supposed to feel sorry or something, and I just said, "Okay. And what does that have to do with me?" She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Well, Riley, they're your parents. They're going through a very difficult time." I told her that my parents stopped being my parents when they kicked me out of the house at 18 without a single penny in my pocket. And I hung up. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, the doorbell rings. I open the door, and there they are. David and Elizabeth. My parents, with 2 suitcases each, and that, "We need a favor," expression that made me want to throw up. My father tried to smile and said, "Hi, Riley. You look good. It's been a long time since we talked. Can we come in?" And I just stood there in the doorway, blocking the entrance, and asked, "What do you want?" My mother started with whether I'd already heard about their situation, and that they'd been living with different family members, but couldn't continue like that, and that they thought maybe they could stay with me temporarily until they got back on their feet. Can you believe it? The audacity of these people to show up after 10 years, after having completely abandoned me, after never having called to see if I was alive or dead, and ask me to let them live in my house, that I bought with my money, that I earned working like a slave, while they didn't lift a finger to help me. I said, "You're joking, right?" My father made that face he used to make when I talked back to him as a kid, that mixture of surprise and anger, and I said, "We're your family, Riley. Families are supposed to help each other." And I laughed. I literally let out a laugh, because the irony was too much. I told them, "Family? You told me at 18 that I had to fend for myself, that I had to learn to survive on my own, remember?" Well, I did. I survived, I thrived, and I did it completely alone because you decided I was no longer your responsibility. So now you can do the same. Fend for yourselves. learn to survive. My mother started crying, something I had never seen her do, and said she was so sorry that they had made a mistake, that those were different times. I said, "No, it wasn't different times. Those were your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences of those choices, just like I had to live with the consequences of yours." And I closed the door. The next few days were a nightmare of calls and messages. My father wrote me long messages about how I was his daughter, and he had raised me as if he deserved a prize for doing the bare minimum. My mother sent me texts saying she was sick and needed a stable place. Find one then, I thought. My Aunt Patricia called me crying, saying I was being cruel and immature, that I had to forgive and forget. My cousin Kevin, who I hadn't even talked to in years, sent me a message saying I was ungrateful and that family is forever. I blocked them all. But it didn't end there, because 2 weeks later I received a letter from a lawyer. My parents had hired someone to send me a legal notice citing some laws about filial responsibility, basically arguing that I had a legal obligation to support them because they had no resources. When I read that, I felt a mixture of panic and rage that almost made me throw the letter in the trash, but instead I took it and went to a lawyer. I explained the whole situation to him, showed him the letter, and he basically told me not to worry, that those laws are almost never enforced, and that considering they voluntarily abandoned me at 18, they had no legal basis to claim anything from me. My lawyer sent them a formal response, basically telling them to go to hell, but in legal language, explaining that their abandonment of me as a minor, technically yes, because they kicked me out the moment I turned 18 without any support, plus the fact that they didn't contribute anything to my education or welfare after that age, eliminated any possible filial obligation. My parents' lawyer never responded. I imagine he realized they had no case and simply recommended they let it go. About 6 months went by without hearing anything from them. Sometimes I wondered where they were, if they were still alive, but then I reminded myself that they never wondered that about me during the hardest years of my life, and the thought passed. The truth is, there were moments, especially at night when I was alone in my house, when I questioned whether I had done the right thing. A part of me, a small part that still had something of that little girl who wanted her parents' love, felt guilty. But then I thought about how they literally left me on the street, how they never called to see how I was, how they only showed up when they needed something from me, and that guilt transformed back into the same cold rage I felt when I saw them at my door. About 3 months ago, I received a package at my house. It had no return address, just my address written by hand, and when I opened it, I found an old photo of me when I was about 5 with my parents. One of the few family photos that exist because we were never one of those families that took pictures. There was a letter inside, handwritten by my mother, where she basically said she was sorry, that they had been very hard on me, that she understood why I was angry, and that she didn't expect me to forgive them, but wanted me to know they thought about me. There was no request for money or help, just that. I read it once and put it in a drawer. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't respond, either. I don't know if I'll ever forgive my parents. Honestly, I don't know. There are days when I think that maybe when they're very old and really sick, I'll soften up and help them with something. But there are also days when I think, I don't owe them absolutely anything, and they deserve to face the consequences of having abandoned me. But what I do know is that I don't regret closing the door on them that day. It sounds harsh, and it probably is, but the reality is that they taught me that life is hard and that everyone has to fend for themselves, and I learned that lesson too well. Now I have a good life. I make good money. I have my house. I have some friends from work who are more family to me than my biological parents ever were. The other day, I was sitting in my yard drinking coffee and thinking about how 12 years ago I was living in that horrible studio, eating ramen every day, not knowing if I was going to be able to pay next month's rent, completely alone in the world. And now, I'm here, in my own house that I bought, with a job I like, that pays well, and I did it completely alone. Nobody helped me, nobody reached out when I needed it, and although that hurt me and still hurts sometimes, it also made me stronger than I would have been if I'd had a normal family that supported me. Is it sad that I don't have a relationship with my parents? I guess so, in a way. But it's also liberating not having to deal with people who only see you as an obligation or, worse yet, as a resource they can use when it suits them. My parents had 18 years to love me, to make me feel valued, to be real parents, and they chose not to. I don't owe them anything, and I no longer feel guilty about that reality. They made their bed, as the saying goes. Now they can lie in it. Just like I had to lie in mine when they kicked me out with nothing.